Right, so once again, good afternoon to you all and welcome to CS111 Week 10 e-mentoring session. My name is Moshe and I'll be taking this session, right? So, let's begin with this session. And first of all, variable scope, right? So scopes, so there are two types of scope to care about. First one is local scope, the second one is global scope. So local scope is relevant within a function and global scope is defined by the entire file, right? So Akhil and Anare, do you know something about local scope and global scope? Do you have any idea about what local scope is and global scope is? Okay, so Akhil said no, and Anare, do you have any idea? No. Okay. So, right? So first of all, let's take a look at global scope, local scope, right? So assume you have your int main, right? So this is your int main. I hope it's clear, right? Now we have declared a variable int x here, right? Now you have another function here named function foo, right? Will you be able to use that x which you have declared there in here? Right? So the x that you have declared in the main, will you be able to use it in this function, assuming that this function is and this main function are on the same code? So yes or no, and why? Okay, so you don't know. Okay, so the x you have declared in the main, right? And the x that is used here, you cannot use that, right? If you declare another int x here, then you'll be able to use it here, right? So the scope, the local scope, that is local scope of this declaration of x is from here till the end of the main file, right? So that is local scope, and the scope of this variable x is from here till the end of the function. You cannot use that variable x apart from anywhere it is declared. For instance, assuming this was y, right? You have declared y here, you won't be able to use it in here because the scope of that y will be from here till here, right? So that is local scope, right? So all of you clear on local scope, or still there's confusion on local scope? Clear? Right. Now let's move on to global scope. Right? So global scope, so this is local scope. You can use only for that specific function till the time is declared till the end of the function, right? Now global scope. So global means global. You can use it anywhere. So global functions are mainly defined before the main function. So or before declaring any functions to declare global scope. For example, int right? It is not declared inside any function. It is declared before the main and before any other function declarations, right? So this car will be able to use it anywhere in the program, right? The value will remain the same. So that is known as global scope. So local scope, you declare inside a function and it is only valid in that function till the function ends or till the scope ends. For example, if you declare inside two brackets int z, then you'll only be able to use it within that. That's local. But global, you declare on top of the main before any functions, and you will be able to use it anywhere in the program, right? Clear on that? Clear between the difference between global scope and local scope? Yes? Great. Clear? Okay. Now let's move on to the second slide, and this gives a bit more enlightenment on local scope, right? So block 1, we have declared number. Number can be used here in the if statements and in the for statements, right? Now in block 2, we have declared k. Now k can only be used inside this if statement, right? From the time it is declared till the end of the brackets of the if statement, right? Yeah, that is local scope. And also here, the I can only be used till the time is declared till the end of the for loop. So that is the local scope, this is the local scope, and this is the local scope, right? So any one of you have any questions regarding this slide? Okay, right, that's great. Now let's move on to the summary of it. So local scope, when you declare a variable, the name and the value is only alive for some parts of the program, right? We have understood that. We must declare variables before you use them so that the scope of a variable starts when it is declared, right? So the scope of a variable starts when it is declared. If a variable is declared within a block, compound statement between two parentheses, it only stays alive until the end of the block, right? If the block is the one surrounding the entire function body, the variable is only alive from when it is declared until the end of the function. Right? If the block defines a loop body or a if statement body, the variable only lives till the end of the loop or if. You can add any block you want in the code and it will define the scope for any variables declared in it, right? So you can define the scope within brackets, right? So if any variable is declared within some brackets, parentheses, it is valid from the time it's declared till the end, right? So that is local scope. Right. And now the summary on global scope. This is for variables shared between the functions, right? Global scopes are defined outside any block. They're visible to every function defined after them, right? So this is a point to take note. So we have said before the main function, right? Now if before the main function, there's the function foo, and there's the function find, right? Now if you declare the global scope over here, then it will be global to this foo function, main function, all the function declared after it, but it won't be global for the function declared on top of it, right? So it won't be declared visible for the find function. So we must always declare the global functions and global variables and then write the functions, right? So that it is visible to all the functions defined after them, right? So that is global scope. Generally, global variables are not a good idea, right? So because it can cause many conflicts between the variables. For example, if you have declared a variable, x, and you are declared as a global scope, right? Or declared a variable I for a more realistic situation, right? So you have declared a variable I as global, and now in the for loop you are again declaring I. Now when the compiler runs, it will be confused whether to use the value from the global scope or the value you have defined here, right? So that is why it is not a good programming practice to use global variables, but like sometimes you need them, then we can use it, right? But here's why they're used, and when they can be used, they can be careful to use them. Then we use global scope, right? So any questions regarding global scope and local scope so far? Are all of you clear? No questions? Okay, great. Now consider the following function. We have bool, data type, return type is what? Double temperature, right? And it does something in this code. Now you have to identify which of the statements here is correct, right? So the function should have return type bool, the function parameter temp should have been of type bool, or the function does not always retain a value, or you can always only use one return in the function, or none of the above, right? So I give you 3 minutes. Can you answer this question? Right? So I hope all of you are answering the questions, right? Okay, so both of you have answered D, right? So let's go one by one and let's take a look at one solution at a time and let's see which one is correct. Let's see if D is correct or it is not correct, right? So part A says the function should have return type boolean, right? So the data type is boolean and you're returning true and false, which is boolean, so it's correct. No problem with A. Now B. The parameter temp should have been of type bool. So we have double temp and temp greater than 30. No, we are comparing integer or a float value. Then therefore it does not need to be of type bool, which is good in type double. Yeah. Now the function does not always return a value. No, it retains a value here. It retains a value here, right? Now next one, you can only use one retain in a function, right? So the thing here is that about retaining, right? You can have multiple, you can write retain many times, but it should only retain once to the main function, right? In our situation, if the temperature is greater than 30, it will retain true, and the program will, and the function will end there, done. If the temperature is less than 30, it will return false and done. It does not return something like this, return true, return false both, right? So it does not do that. Therefore it returns only once, right? So that's the main idea, right? So we can retain many times, but one return should be made to the, we can write retain many times, but it depends on a program structure, right? But only once we should return back to the main function, right? And that is what happens here. So if the temperature is greater than 30, we return true, else return false, right? So the best answer for this is none of the above, right? Because this function is fully correct, right? So I guess you got confused seeing two return functions, seeing two returns, but yeah, don't get confused. It's only one value will be returned to the main function, right? So clear on this one? Great, right, okay. Now, number two, can you write what will this print? Right, so I give you 3 minutes or 4 minutes. I'll just zoom in, so you have to write what will A, B, C, D, E, F, G print. I'll just zoom in here. Mm. Right. So can you please write what will this print? I hope all of you are attempting it. Okay, so Akhil has identified from A to F, and his G is left, and another you have identified A and B, and C, D, E, F, and G is left. Right? So let's see. Okay, right. So let's do it together. Right, so you have provided an answer and another has provided an answer and the answers are a bit different, right? So let's see which answer is correct. Now, we always start from the int main, right? So we see out a number and the number. So number here is declared the global variable 1, right? So start here, the number is 1. So a will be 1. Then we change the value, then number is equals to 3. And then we display the number will be 3. Right? So we go line by line and then we change number. We change number, we go on function number equals 2. But this is not returning any number back to the main, therefore the number will remain 3 and here we go here. Now number C, number here will be 3 again, and here in this scope we are displaying the number, it will be 3, then number equals to 4 will be 4, and go back here number. So this declaration of number was only valid from here till here. Now we'll again use the number that we declared in here in num3, so number will be 3. And now let's look at another scope. So this was the scope one scope. Now we'll go back to number 1. Here we'll print number 1, right? So I guess you're confused on that now. So all is clear on this now? Still any confusion? I know this question was a bit confusing. So yeah, great. And until you clear? Right. Now let's take a look at this question. Consider the following function and what would be a good comment to describe the function, right? So it's one of the most simplest questions and you have to just describe what the function does in the form of a comment, right? So let's see who finds the answer faster, right? Okay, so both of you said B and the response was fast, so that's great, right? So let's see. There's a function named displayPay. It takes 2 parameters and you have to add a comment here, so it displays the gross pay and displays the net pay, right? So your answer is this function uses parameters gross pay B. This function prints gross and net pay, gives double gross pay, and that's right. Right. Yeah, so the answer here is B. And both of you got it in really fast, so that's great. That means you know how function should be commented, right? It shouldn't be like this. It is a void function or name of the function or display something or the parameters, right? It shouldn't describe about the syntax, right? We know it's void. We know the name. We know the parameters. It should describe what the function does to someone who doesn't know programming, but has to read the code. So the comment is for the non-programmers or someone who will just come out of nowhere to edit the code, so they will see the comment, right? So the comment should be like, it should give the description at a higher level, right? Right? So yeah, the best comment here is number B. This function prints gross pay and net pay, gives double gross pay and tax rate, right? So good job, both of you got it correct, right? Now let's move on to value parameters. All of the parameters discussed so far were value parameters. When you call a function with value parameters, you pass the value to the function. You can modify the parameter, but its value will be lost unless you return the value. This is because the end of the function is not the end of scope. right? So value parameters, right? For example, here we had change number equals 2, right? So if you provided a number here, okay, let's make a new function over here, right? So assume we have a function in calc, then we have int x. Here we do x is equals to 2, and then we can x, right? Now assuming this return is not here and the type here is void, right? So type is void, void. Now it takes a parameter x and it changes the value for x to 2 and it does not return anything, right? So this is a value parameter, right? And the parameter that you pass to a value and you do not change the value, you change the value here and not return the value back to the main, that is value parameters, right? So the change you make here won't be reflected back in the main function, right? So that is value parameters. So the change won't be detected unless you return the value. If you return the value in the main function will change depending on what you assign it to, right? So the thing about value parameters is changes to the value parameters in the function does not reflect the changes in the main function, right? So that is value parameters. And the other type of parameters is reference parameters. Let's discuss both and then we'll see the difference, right? So semantics, when you declare a variable in the program, the compiler reserves an amount of space for that variable, right? A reference parameter is a reference to that location rather than the value stored at that location. You pass an argument as a reference with the preceding argument name with an ampersand sign, right? So this is ampersand sign. So if you change the value here like this, it won't reflect in the main function, that is the value parameter. But if you put an ampersand sign before x, then the value in the main will also change, right? Because it is some form of reference. So all you need to know, if there was no ampersand sign and you change the value here, it will not reflect back in the main. But if we have an ampersand sign here, it will reflect back in the main the changes that you made in the function, right? So are you clear on that or still facing some confusion? Okay, another example. So let's do another example. This time I will write it properly and give the difference between the two. Now, int function void function 1 parameter is int x, and what we do in this function is x is equals to 3, and we have another void function 2 int reference x, and we do x equals to 3, right? and then we have a main function where we have int x, and we are calling the function. Okay. So in the main function declaring a variable x, we are calling either this function or this function, and then we're printing the value of x after calling the function. Right? So now let's work with the fetch function, right? Assuming we pass the parameter x here, this or y or z. So assume y, right? So we are declaring y here, and y does not have any. Let's initialize it to 0, right? So y comes here, y equals x equals to 3, done. Goes back here, it will still print 0, right? Since it is not reference, it is a variable parameter, the changes that we made in the other function will not reflect the changes there in the main function. But if we use call this function, we pass in y is 0 and x equals to 3, it has been referenced. The changes will also be made in the main function. Therefore, the value will be 3. So if this function is called, the value will still be 0. But if this function is called, since it is referenced, the value will change to 3 also in the main function. Right? So clear? Okay, so so Akhil is clear, and what about Anare? Anare, you clear? Okay, so those were the main things that I have to discuss in the session. And now let's take a look at the summary, right? So determine the scope of a variable. The scope of a variable is a part of the program in which it is visible. A variable in a nested block shows a variable with the same name in an outer block. A local variable is defined inside a function. A global variable is defined outside of the function. Avoid global variables in a program, right? So the first part. The second part will look at how reference parameters work. So modifying a value parameter has no effect on the caller. That means the value in the main will not be changed. A reference parameter refers to a variable that is supplied to a function call. Modifying a reference parameter updates the variable that was supplied in the call in the main function as well, right? So these are the things we discussed today. So any questions regarding those, or are all of you clear? All the things that I discussed today? All okay, right? So you have any other questions for me? On any topics can see a simple one. So when test 2, okay, about test 2, no, when indeed. Okay, I'm not sure about your test 2. Wait, I got an email. Let's see if it is something regarding that. So I just so agent CS111 test 2 from your course coordinator. So it says that dear all, please note that test 2 for CS111 is scheduled for Friday 5th May 2017 from 12 to 1 p.m. This test will be of 50-minute duration and is worth 7.5% of the coursework, and the venue is at USD or Z092201, right? So the test details have been emailed to you by your course coordinator, right? Yeah. So any other questions? No other questions? Okay. So yeah, that's all that I had for today's session. And if you have any other questions, you can always email me. My ID is S1111970, right? So yeah, if you have any questions, you can email me. And good luck to your lectures and assignments and upcoming exams, right? So thank you very much. I'll stay here for about 2 to 3 minutes. If you have any questions, you can always ask, correct? I'm stopping the recording now. So thank you very much and have a great weekend.